Good morning, Asia Pacific, Japan. I am Dave Russell. This is my esteemed colleague, Jason Buffington. We are absolutely thrilled to be joining you in Asia Pacific, Japan, in your time zone live, because so many of you, for now literally a year, Jason, in Asia Pacific, have been joining us in our time zone. So we thought, what's the least that we could do? Which is join live, take questions live, take comments live, actually have people say where they're tuning in from in the comments section so we can actually see that live. And not the least of which reasons why, Jason, is because we have some very exciting, literally best ever in industry research to share with people. Take that and run with that. Set that stage, please.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Dave said. Thank you so much for all those in APJ that have been joining us rather late in your evenings and early in your mornings for the last year. So we wanted to try to have a couple times where we would actually come and join you during your day. And as Dave mentioned, so some of the data that we've been sharing has been from the Data Protection Report for 2021. We believe it's the largest single industry research project ever done around data protection. We surveyed 3,000 unbiased IT enterprise or decision makers in 28 countries around the world. I did a blog post, 2 weeks ago now. And in the blog post, I talked about, do you actually need 3,000 respondents to a survey? And the answer is no, you don't. You don't need 3,000 responses if the only thing you're going to do is a chart for a PowerPoint. If you're trying to prove on your data sheet that you're right or whatever you want to do, you don't need 3,000, right? The reason we did 3,000 is because we cut it by 28 different countries. What we're going to cover today, we're going to cover the APJ region as a whole. So 700 of our 3,000 respondents were from region. So we're going to talk about that. But after the call, and we'll send you the link after this is over, we have specific cuts of this data for Australia, New Zealand. We have specific cuts for China, for Japan, for India, for Singapore. I mean, the ASEAN countries as a whole. I mean, there's lots of different cuts. That's why you do 3,000. Yeah. So you can cut it a bunch of different ways. Super excited to share the APJ cut with folks today.
Yeah, excellent. And, Jason, we've been doing this actually literally just over 1 year. This is episode, I believe, 46. I have to bring in extra fingers there, but I believe this is episode 46 of our LinkedIn Live Industry Insight live streams. Without further ado, let's hit our first graphic. And I'm going to toss it right back to you, Jason, because this is something that's been near and dear to your heart for many years. You call it the reality gap. What does that mean? Unpack reality gap for us. And Jason's actually gone through the trouble of making sure we're actually presenting of that 3,000 that he mentioned, the specifics to the Asia Pacific region.
Yeah, so the reality gap in general is for the 31 years that I've been in IT and data protection, there's almost always been a gap between what the business expects and what IT can actually deliver. And so this asks two basic questions. Imagine taking the business leaders, putting them in one room and asking those folks, if IT were to go down, because IT breaks, it does. If IT goes down, how long before business process starts to suffer? And then go to another conference room and ask the IT people, when the systems go down, how long does it really take to get up and running again? What this data shows, actually the top chart of this, is the gap between what does the business expect in uptime and what can IT actually deliver. And if you look at the green, we have 33% of the APJ respondents said they strongly agree there's a gap. 49% agree there's a gap. So quick math, 82%, a little over 4 out of 5 organizations. By the way, I will tell you that is slightly higher than it is in the rest of the world. So when we look at the global data, it's in the high 70s, I think. We broke 82% in the APJ region, which basically tells us that as important as system availability is worldwide, APJ respondents are even more sensitive to downtime than the global population. So more of a dependency around IT. The second stat on the bottom, go to the first group and ask them how much data can you afford to lose? And then go to the IT folks next door and say, how often do we protect our data? And that one's actually a real simple question, right? Because if the business folks say we can only lose a couple hours of data, and the IT team says we back up every night, right? You have a gap. Right, and in fact, in this case, of the 700 APJ respondents, we've got 77%. Again, slightly higher than what the global average is. So, what that tells us is that in the APJ region, there is even a higher level of sensitivity and requirement dependency to IT, even than the rest of the world, where those stats were already pretty alarming overall. And again, I would just encourage folks, talk to your Veeam representatives, go to the Veeam local websites. You can get this data and start this conversation with your business owners and with your IT administrators. And you can have your data for ANZ, for China, for Japan, for India. Go get your versions of this data and then compare that with your own company insights.
Yeah, and I'd love to put a finer point on that, Jason, because, in the past, meaning pre-ransomware cyber threat, I oftentimes referred to backup and recovery as if you state this in a bit of a negative context, it is a juxtaposition of how much data are you willing to lose? How much time are you willing to wait to get a copy of data back?
That's right.
How much manpower, human effort are you willing to throw into this equation? And how much money are you willing to pay for the privilege of getting an older copy of data to get back up and running again? And the human response, the rhetorical response is, of course, I want to minimize all of those things.
Sure.
But unfortunately, along comes things like ransomware, which could take the attack surface or the restore percentage of data up dramatically. And with that, I think that might be a great way to tee up our next slide, causes of outages.
Yeah, so in this case, what you're looking at is there's actually 3 bands. So in the dark green band, this is when any of the 668, so not everyone answered this question from APJ of the 700 respondents, so a little less than that, flagged what outage causes they had over the year. You can check as many as you might have had. In the bright green, which is what it's actually sorted by, is what was the most impactful outage in the APJ region. And then just for fun, we also put that little bitty gray line in between. That is the most impactful globally. And I do think it's interesting that while for the most part, most impactful in APJ and most impactful worldwide line up, but there are a couple really interesting differences. Most notably, infrastructure scores a little bit higher. Application outage actually scores a lot higher in APJ than it does in rest of world. It actually kind of skews the gap a little bit. So, and then the rest of this kind of falls out from there. But Dave, you and I have looked at causes of outages in one organization or another for years upon years. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the first thing that strikes me, Jason, even if you don't look at the specific text on the left-hand side, I just look at the green bars, meaning the ones that are most pronounced and going over all the way to the right-hand side. And I just say, if people could choose all the things that occurred, oh my goodness, there's so many different things. So many different, it's not like, whatever, the Jason and Dave company could say, we're just going to make sure we get networking right. We're just going to make sure we focus on application availability. No, actually, there are a myriad of challenges today that still take down servers. And I find this fascinating because you and I are both software people, right? But we hear of infrastructure. We hear of improved mean time to failure. We hear of improved redundancy, redundant power supplies, redundant
Yep.
fans.
Sure.
The list goes on and on. However, server outages, network outages, configuration issues, application, operating system. I mean, this whole list goes on and on. So the first reaction I have is a lot of things still happen even today that can take down a server.
Oh, yeah.
Number two, that's kind of surprising to me is the scary concern, of course, is the external notion of cybersecurity ransomware. However, that's actually a little lower on the list, which is not to say it's not important. It's just to say there are so many things that can actually cause an outage. This is why backup remains essential.
Yeah, let's bring the chart back up again in full screen because I want to make sure that folks get a chance to hopefully make a screenshot of this because I think this is really, really important. The dark green lines means that of the 668 respondents, let's take cybersecurity as an example. It's the second in the list in stacking as far as most impactful. 54% of the organizations in this survey, all enterprises greater than 1,000 employees, 54% of those organizations said they had a cyber event. Half. Right. So every time you see the news and you're thinking, well, it's 1 out of 6, 1 out of 8, it won't happen to me. If you flip a coin, literally, you are more than likely going to have cyber. 54%, 57% had an infrastructure problem, 58% had an application issue, 58% had a hardware issue. Right. This is not a matter of if. This absolutely is a matter of when. In fact, the only scenarios that were really markedly less than 58%, I'll take the high 40s and round them up. The only one on that whole list that happened less than half of organizations was intentional admin deletion. Every other scenario was 50% or better, almost across the board. So just understand, and then beyond that, then certainly recognizing infrastructure network connectivity. That's interesting. That's number one, because when you have an infrastructure networking issue, the whole site goes away, right? You're not talking about a couple servers. You're talking about the whole site is just disconnected from the rest of the world. When cyber happens, right, that's why we see it is because it is most expensive. It is most impactful. But hugely insightful data on this one, and specific to what's going on in APJ.
Yeah, great point. And let's move to what I consider to be our money slide. I hope that's not just a Western term, an American term, but meaning like what is the most impactful sort of killer, amazing takeaway? This would be it. And so, we both love this, but I will just chime on one thing. And Jason, I want to toss it over to you, let you chime in. But we've got actually an exhaustive list. We just gave you the top few here. But what is amazing is when we ask a fairly simple question, which is, what would drive you to change your primary backup solution? You could choose all of the things, and we asked you to choose the single most impactful thing that would make you change your backup and recovery software. And you can see that in terms of global average, and Jason was so kind to put this in terms of APJ specific. And what we see actually shockingly to me, Jason, and shockingly is, I almost can't, say that strongly enough. The top reason is to improve the backup success rate, the reliability of backups. And you and I have been in this industry for a long time. There's an old joke, a bad joke perhaps, that says it's very difficult to restore that which you have not backed up.
Yeah, it is almost heartbreaking that after, each of us have 31 years by coincidence in this space, 31 years, right? In greater than 3 decades. I didn't have children when I started backing stuff up. 3 decades later, backup for many organizations is still broken. Right? 1 out of 8 organizations says their number one reason to change is they want it to work. Right? They want reliability along that way. Now, there is, as Dave mentioned, there's a lot more reasons. There's actually about 15 to 18 different reasons that are out there. Again, what you're looking at is when you can choose all the things that are important to you. That's in the dark green. In fact, the number one most important dark green thing, what was the most common driver, is to work better, to improve RPO, RTO, which, by the way, that means RPO is the fancy way of saying how much data can I lose, right? RTO is the fancy way of saying how quickly can I recover. And we saw that on slide 1, right? We saw that many organizations believe that they can't recover fast enough. They believe that they are going to lose too much data when they do get back up and running. So it doesn't surprise me that that is the number one overall most common. But I do think it's interesting that that reliability is still top of mind in APJ and overall. There were actually a couple interesting spikes that I thought were notable. Interestingly enough, that as important as reliability is over worldwide, it's even more than that statistically in APJ. I thought it was interesting that moving from on-prem backup solutions to cloud-based backup solutions actually was number 2 overall in most important. That doesn't make the top 6 or 7 in the Americas, North America and South America, and I haven't looked at what the EMEA cut on that is, but that was notably higher. I also thought it was really interesting that in APJ, using diversified tools for backup and using purpose-built backup tools for different workloads had a higher interest in APJ than it does in rest of world. But that makes sense to me because remember the last slide talked about application outages actually being very impactful. Well, if application outages are being impactful, then what you're going to want is purpose-built tools that understand the difference between a best of breed for Office 365 that's going to look different than a best of breed for virtualization or a best of breed for SAP or Oracle. By the way, Veeam happens to have all of those. As a little plug. I'm going to do another plug, though, and this will probably hopefully blow up our LinkedIn. As Dave mentioned, these slides are brand new. They have never been published anywhere else. They have not been seen anywhere else. And the complete list of this has not been published anywhere. If you make a comment on the LinkedIn live stream as far as where you're from, I will send you the unfiltered, not published anywhere else APJ list of what's driving change in backup. It's not available anywhere else, but that'll be fun. So please feel free to tell us where you're signing in from today. That'll be interesting to look at. And I'm going to go to bed after this, and I will be sending those out tomorrow. So
wow, seriously, awesome offer, Jason. That's pretty killer. And I mean, this is literally the industry's largest ever data protection survey, and you're saying you're throwing down the hammer, if you will, that you're gonna send out to anyone that comments.
Yep.
What are the specific? Okay. All right. I love it. And so I encourage everyone, give us a little shout out, put in the LinkedIn live chat and, me in the comment section.
Just
where
tell
you're
us where you're
tuning in from. Any questions also you may want to ask. So awesome. I love that. What I want to do next is let's take this up slightly, just a tiny touch. And let's just talk about digital transformation and what's been going on, as it relates to current events, meaning the pandemic, which is almost inescapable, unfortunately. But we all hope that we're nearing the favorable corner of coming out of that. And Jason, the reason I'd like to touch on this, meaning digital transformation, is not something that every backup administrator always feels that they're akin to, or everyone that's responsible, if you're the director of infrastructure, et cetera, may feel like that is my domain. However, we all have a role to play in digital transformation, just like we all have a role to play in security. And this slide I thought was particularly fascinating. Not surprisingly, the number one response is what, if anything, was preventing you from moving forward with your digital transformation initiative was the pandemic. However, Jason, I like to really look at what I will call, it's almost a three-way tie for number one, right?
Sure.
1 percentage point is separating all 3 responses. Technically, it's a 2-way tie for number 2. However, we've seen year after year concerns about staffing and skills.
Yep.
We've seen concerns about dependency on legacy technologies. I will use the phrase technical debt, and it's manifesting itself again in digital transformation. And the reason I like to highlight this is I had a colleague that I used to work with when I was an industry analyst, and I will steal his thunder. I'll name his name. His name is Stan Zappos. But he had a great phrase. And the phrase was, don't be wedded to past decisions, which was a way of saying what was perfectly reasonable and appropriate to do some time ago may not be the best way going forward. And that's exactly how I describe an organization's approach to digital transformation. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So the first thing that came to mind when I saw this. So again, what you're looking at here is the bright the Veeam green, if you will. The true green is the 453 IT executives at this point that were surveyed on digital transformation from the APJ. That compares with the yellowish green, which came from the global survey, 1,800 IT execs. And then also those were both from the 2020 survey, very late in the year, right, finishing in January of 21. We did the same survey a year prior. And so that is that darkest green, which is the global data from 2020, which you should equate as pre-COVID. In the darkest green. So what you're looking at is from dark green to is pre-COVID to the yellow green, which is worldwide, and then looking at APJ in particular. The thing that I thought was really interesting is, and I love what your friend quoted, because when you look at what most industry analysts will tell you, they'll say that organizations tend to spend between 68 and 82%. So split the difference, call it about 75% of their budget and of their manpower maintaining the status quo. And that doesn't give you a lot of room to work with on modernizing the rest of your environment. Now, take a look at the APJ data, because certainly in APJ, that dark green, even more focused on the pandemic and overall slightly higher. But those next two down, I think, tell a really condemning story. And that is that if you're in an outsourcing model, if you're in a model where you have really been locked down and trying to make that hardware last just a little bit longer, what we see is, look at the dark greens, 40% dependency on legacy systems went up to 51% overall, went up to 55% in APJ. Lack of IT skills. So let's try to get those people to work just a little bit longer. Their skills were outdated globally 44% of the time. That goes up to 49% worldwide after COVID, goes up to 55% in APJ. So what that tells me is, organizationally, as folks are keeping data longer and as they have locked down in quarantine, the skill gap is exacerbated even more in APJ than it is in rest of world. And there's already a problem rest of world. Right. Yeah. And if you're struggling with skills and you're struggling with legacy gear, you're not going to be able to move forward, which means you can't do the stuff the business wants because you're too busy maintaining the stuff that the business has. That's the problem.
Yeah. That is exactly right, in my opinion, Jason. And the problem is you don't want to have that headwind that prevents you from moving forward faster. So, we've talked about some of the challenges. Let's transition to, I'll call it the rescue, right?
Yes.
What does modern look like as it relates to what people think globally, but more importantly in Asia Pacific, Japan? What does modern or a innovative solution look like as defined by people in region? And what I love about this is it's multi-factor, as you might imagine. However, there are some interesting trends here, and I'll toss it back to you to dissect.
Yeah, as always, the dark green means that you could choose more than one. And so in APJ, of the 700 IT decision makers in region, the most common answer, what does modern look like? It looks like DRAS. It looks like disaster recovery as a service for 40% of organizations. But what I think is super interesting is overall in APJ, it's actually a four-way tie for second. And that's the 36 percenters that you see on there, which is the ability to move workloads from one cloud to another, right? By the way, that scores higher in APJ than it does in rest of the world, which I think shows their interest in a fluidness or flexibility of a multi-cloud strategy. I'm really excited about that and what that means for the APJ market. Also at 36%, tied for second place, was the ability to automate tasks and to manage from an API or from a management framework. And that's interesting because we know that large parts of the APJ IT market are often outsourced. And so if you are using an outsourcing model and someone is managing that infrastructure for you, having backup be taken care of as part of that other broader framework absolutely makes sense for the APJ market. Similarly, right behind that, also 36%, the ability to do orchestration and workflows. Again, trying to get out of those manual tasks, trying to orchestrate and repeat things so that you have better consistency. And then lastly, and I think this speaks to the 36% as well, the ability to standardize between on-prem policies and IaaS and SaaS policies, and that rings true. That's a tie with the top one, which was that organizations in APJ are saying they want to be able to leverage a multi-cloud, they want to be able to leverage a hybrid cloud architecture, and they want policies that are consistent between how you protect on-prem and how you protect in Amazon and in Azure and in Google, and they'd like to do that with a management framework. That's what APJ answers for that. That's the overall response. And then to see that agility between clouds and disaster recovery using a cloud are the top two answers, again, just talks to the progressive pro-cloud nature of the APJ region.
Yeah, very well said. And I want to give a huge shout out and thank you, obviously, for everyone that's tuned in, to all of our live streams. But Stella, Jake, and I got to make sure I get Leo in there too. Hey, thank you so much. Australia's
here. Green. Yes.
Yep. We got Singapore. We've got Australia. Tuning in live right now. Obviously, if you tune in later, by the way, give a shout out or give a comment, meaning in this LinkedIn chat. Still, even if you view this sometime after the initial viewing, we greatly appreciate your participation. This is a little fun thing that we like to do, a little technology that we've got. Looking ahead, what we've got are a couple of exciting things. Now, on Monday, we're going to bring in a special guest, Andrew Zalesko from our Veeam product strategy team. He has been, I'll call him a cloud dog, meaning like he is all over. He's a pit bull, basically, on all things cloud. He and I are going to riff on, we talk a lot about cloud, you and me, Jason, and it's not just one thing. I love your phrase, Jason. The cloud is not a single thing. So we're going to decompose a little bit about what Veeam can do in that capacity. We've got, prior to that, though, this Friday, our great friends David Hill and also we've got Sam. I'm sorry, I said David. David Hill is correct. And then we've also got Sam Nichols discussing cloud yet again in a different context around AWS specific protection. But Jason, tell us a little bit about Veeam On. This is a pretty major industry analyst event that we put on year after year.
Yeah, so this is our worldwide user conference, and while there are many things that have been inconvenient about the global pandemic, one of the things that we started doing last year was it did give us a chance to really open up the Veeam On catalog and user experience to a truly worldwide experience. And so we've got a couple days. It's May 25th and 26th, or 26th or 27th, depending on which hemisphere that you are in. But these are deep dive, hard hitting, 300 and 200 level sessions from all the major experts. Dave, I see your name on the list. Our friend Rick Vanover's there. Our boss Danny's on the list. Anton, a longtime spokesperson for Veeam. So it's going to be just a fantastic 2 days of sharing ideas, of giving and getting feedback, of bonding with other Veemers. It's going to be a great 2 days.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in for literally the last year plus in the Asia Pacific region. We hope to get out there and visit you sometime soon in person. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Thank you.
Take care.